a quick snapshot on Lana, if you're not familiar with the company, we are actually building the boxes. So we are hardware vendor traditionally. We're coming traditionally from the ODM model where we usually build platforms and they are branded under a different company name based on their specific requirements. Now with the market dynamics and changing in the industry there is a lot of changes in some of the requirements where our hardware platforms are being adopted by the service providers like AT&T, Verizon, and so on. And ultimately, they are actually speccing out their hardware platform where they want to run the vCPE on, or even some of the SD-WAN applications, all the way down to the core network. So with that in mind, we are building platforms which are tailored towards the best case scenario for deployment in the network. So this is a quick snapshot on all the platforms we are building so far, which is already deployed in the network and carrier networks as a platform where multiple VNFs are running, where they're sharing resources. But my focus today in this session is really around creating a virtual environment for the virtual CPE deployment. I'm going currently in the motion with one of our software partners in the first rollout of a deployment for SD-WAN and vCPE services in the network. And the first question what I got is when I talked to the engineering team on that who are actually looking after the field deployment is, well, have we done a site survey? Do we know what the conditions are? Do we have power? Do we have network connectivity? How is the network connectivity? Have we full line speed? Is it limited? So there are a lot of questions when you start thinking about the little drone scenario where you drop the box and you just plug it in. It's not as simple today because the operational aspect is still a key element how you're going to be rolling out these services. So if you don't know where these platforms are going and what are the environments, you need to be prepared for that in order to make this rollout successful. Otherwise, the customer will be upset, he will be frustrated, and also he will not be able to launch the services and you will not be able to manage it. Ultimately, you won't make the money on that. So these are some of the questions I captured when I looked at the first rollout for these VCE scenarios. And most of our partners are software partners. They don't care what their hardware does. They just want to know it has to do certain things. We need to be able to manage it. We are there to take care of the hardware aspect of things. So ultimately, when we look at the access layer, so the access layer is really a very dynamic field right now, and it's the most aggressive field right now. So we're hearing requirements where customers are asking, we need a platform, we need a box for less than $200. And it needs to do all of this, LTE, Wi-Fi, LAN connectivity, network security, everything for $200. Well, we are a partner of Intel, primarily. That's usually my answer. The first line in the defense is that Intel has not really reached the point of a $200 scenario where we can deliver platforms which are reaching that business model. We understand that most of the time it's really depending on how many virtual network functions you're running on the virtual CPE, because this will drive the requirements on the hardware platform, and also what will be the I/O functionality on all these elements, right? And I'm talking just about the overall model for the hardware side. So if you add the software on top of that, you need to make sure that the business model pans out so that the customer is actually getting a benefit out of that. So if some vCPE vendors are trying to keep on the lock-in mechanism, where you really have to talk to a specific vendor in order to run another VNF on this platform, is closed and not open, this business model might not pan out. So there's a lot of questions about make and break. So let me go into vCPE applications in general. So the session before already identified some of the elements on that firewall, anything what is revenue generating. What my previous speaker also forgot is the service assurance, because he brought the service assurance to the end of his presentation. Because usually that's a necessity which we are not really thinking about initially, to manage the network conditions. You know, do I have a poor network condition? Do I have network condition at all? How do I manage, how do I get visibility throughout the network? So these are some of the questions that customers are now in this rollout period are asking for. And therefore, there are some necessities in the rollout to actually be able to get the framework, meaning the hardware, the network security, the service insurance. These are pretty much the key elements before you actually can deploy the VNF for the revenue stream. So there's a lot of things that needs to be considered. What we see, or what I have been seeing with some of our customers and software partners, is that there's different models for the deployment. There's the centralized mode, distributed mode, or hybrid mode. Hybrid mode, where we have compute resources on the cloud, as well on the virtual CPE device. We have the distributed mode, where we have multiple virtual CPEs running the application. And then we have a centralized mode. That, again, this is driving what will be the actual physical hardware requirements in terms of a core count, and in terms of how many virtual CPEs we need to support. And we are trying to meet the business model which is required for the rollout in terms of a price point, as well in order to meet the environmental specification for the hardware platforms. So the generic virtual CPE landscape is giving multiple scenarios. So I have listed a few of them, what we have on our portfolio, as an open platform where service providers going into production, they're going into proof of concept and the first rollouts. And what is the key element, and we talked about it before, is a fallback scenario. So what if there is no connectivity to the network, to a local area network, or if there is a limited network connectivity to it? So how do I fall back? And how do I manage the platform? How do I know all the little boxes I'm shipping, the customer is complaining, he wants to ship them back, but we don't even have visibility to see what actually the environment is. So therefore, the integration of LTE is one key aspect for the rollout for virtual CPEs. In some cases, we actually have customers who are saying, we're actually looking at a VCE deployment in rural areas where there's no fiber and where there's no network connectivity, but we still want to bring the service to these customers, which is an interesting business model as well. And then the network connectivity towards 10 gig is giving you a bit more flexibility for running multiple VNFs, so there is no impact and there's no bottleneck on the networking, which gives you an advantage to roll out the services, rather than exchanging the virtual CPEs every 2 years. So it gives you an advantage for a longer deployment scenario, including the environmental portion. So the middle one is a more rugged one, probably already been seen by some of our software partners, including New Age Networks, who are using this as their recommendation, who have done some of the testing already. We're working with others. There was a press release about Versa Networks, so we're working very close with Versa Networks. And we're also working with other companies who are the rest of the ecosystem. And talking about the ecosystem, so we've been working with NEC Netcracker as an ecosystem partner, where we can run multiple VNFs on this virtual CPE platform. We're doing some benchmarking as well to make sure it's the right platform for the rollout. The most recent announcement we have, so Versa Networks is in the network security primarily, software-based only. Trend Micro is on the software side as well for network security. The rest on the equation is really around the orchestration and management. And the most recent one we announced about 2 days ago is our partnership with the Blue Planet ecosystem. So we're working with the team over there to have an optimized platform to meet all the conditions in the network, including the bandwidth utilization, network security, as well the management aspect on that. It's easy to say that it's going to work all together, but ultimately, when you have multiple parties involved in the integration becomes the biggest problem most of the time. So we want to eliminate that, and we want to help the ecosystem to address that upfront before you go into a rollout, and to actually be able to run into a revenue stream quicker than with less hassle than predicted. And working with the Blue Planet team from Ciena, and Ciena itself is giving you an open concept. So the idea is to have an open platform where multiple VNFs can run from multiple vendors. This is the ideal scenario. And one reason why we decided to also team up with Blue Planet is because they're giving that framework from an orchestration layer as well from a provisioning layer in the virtual CPE space. So that's one of the ideas behind it. So we do have a couple of platforms downstairs in booth number 40. We also have, we can have a discussion separately on the future, on the vCPE market. I mentioned we are a premier partner of Intel, so most likely most of our platforms are based on Intel today. But we are also in discussions with other vendors who can meet some of the price parameters, and also working and would like to expand our ecosystem to help companies to go to, and service providers to go to the market quicker.
Great. Yes, thank you, Sven, for the talk. Let's now take some questions since we are a little bit early on time. So any questions for Sven? All right, we have one right here. So please identify yourself and then please ask your question.
Yeah, my name is Gurpreet Singh. I'm from Sparran Communications. Question is, in a multi-vendor environment where you have vCPEs from different vendors, and most of the SD-WAN solutions which are out there, they are proprietary, and the communication between the vCPE and SD-WAN controller is proprietary for policy provisioning and stuff. How do you achieve multi-vendor interoperability in that case?
Yeah, so this is depending on the ecosystem around the orchestration layer as well. So it's depending on what kind of tool chain they're using in order to interact with each other.
Right.
And then, so it's really a community effort with companies like Ciena and Blue Planet and others to make sure that there's connectivity and openness in the ecosystem.
Right, because there's lack of standardization as well for the communication between the SD-WAN controller and the vCPEs.
Yes, right. I wouldn't disagree on that. But I think that's why you see in the industry so many small little ecosystems. Everybody builds its own ecosystem.
Exactly.
There's nobody who's driving the overall method.
Yeah.
And that can cause, in some cases, some frustration between some of the VNF vendors. If the industry would like to address it, I think that's one point where it could be addressed. But at the moment, that's...
Earlier, Ralph talked a little bit about sort of what the MEF is trying to do in terms of at least bringing the industry together in terms of terminology and, you know, sort of architecturally looking at things. And of course, they've defined their own interfaces for how you could talk to various components of their third network architecture. So there are efforts going on, but you're right. I mean, it is pretty, disaggregated, if I might say so, at this point. And, you know, paradoxically, we need to aggregate that. Right. Okay, we have a question here. Yeah, please identify yourself and then ask the question.
Sven, I'm Chris with Ciena, Blue Planet UI lead. You showed a slide a little earlier about the sort of 3 swim lanes models for how you can move into vCPE. You had the decentralized, the distributed, or the centralized, distributed, and the hybrid. Sure. Can you tell us a little bit about what's driving customers into each of those buckets? and if any of those buckets are winning or if they're all equally applicable at this stage in the game?
Yeah, so it's depending on, usually on the services rollout. I have a very interesting customer I'm been engaged with in the Boston area who's looking at the overall NFV and SDN scenario slightly different than sort of an open stack and orchestration layer. So they are most likely more on sort of a hybrid mode where you have some of the processing in the VNF, some of the VNFs running in the cloud as a baseline, and then the rest of the VNFs are elastic, meaning I can actually provision my edge platform dynamically with provisioning data from the cloud. So that's the hybrid approach, right? Because the goal is to use multiple VNFs and re-provisioning them when I need it. So if I need a session border controller, if I need something else, I should be able to do it on the fly, right? So it's sort of a hybrid approach. The centralized mode is really when you have just one application on the end. That's usually targeted towards, really just a low-end entrance point, single core platform where there's nothing else running on that. Most likely not, right? And then you have the distributed mode where you do a service chaining between multiple VNFs and vCPE platforms on that end, right? So this is kind of, I try to represent that in that stage.
All right, any other questions? All right, we have one at the back. But actually, can you just hold that? There was one thing I had on this slide, so I might as well stick that in. So you talked, Sven, earlier about that $200 price point, right? And one thought I had, and when you said that was, well, why don't we move, functionality into the cloud away from, don't run the VNFs, the complex VNFs on the vCPE, run them in the cloud. And then there's this question came up that you drew these models and said, well, we have these three. So I don't know if you answered that, but is there a preponderance of moving towards the hybrid mode, or does it very much depend, as you said earlier, on specific customers?
So the hybrid mode, I'm considering this primarily for a customer-specific application.
Okay.
How this is done. I mean, ultimately on the baseline, as I mentioned, on the vCPE side, you need security function, you need sort of a network assurance function. The network assurance function does not need to reside on the vCPE. It could be pretty much residing anywhere in the network, but you need to have a method to communicate that, right? And then so you have to have a baseline on the OS and the client side.
So is your thought that even with just the baseline, it's today not possible to reach that $200 price point, at least with sort of the hardware that we have right now and the way it's priced?
It's close, but not there yet.
But not there yet.
Right.
All right, great. Yeah, please, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Madhu from Cavium. Again, related to the price point. So you said that getting below sub $200 price point is tough. So the first question from me is, do you see scope of low-cost devices of other architecture coming to the customer premises? And if so, what do you foresee in the future so that multi-vendor actually becomes multi-architecture vCPE?
Yeah, so again, interesting discussion. What I had most recently is, so this is usually more indicated for businesses, enterprise level kind of thing. I had a discussion with another customer I'm very close with, where they're running into, or they're talking to a service provider, where they want to potentially use a similar model for sort of a home gateway environment, where you're running some of the unified communications, and that's a very aggressive market. So where you really have to be, to that price point below $200, right? On the enterprise market, it's really just if you ship multiple boxes just to do the services, there is no business case, because you might as well keep your equipment what you have today on the customer premise and keep going like that, right? On the enterprise, on the commercial side, if you try to roll out these services on a similar concept for the commercial aspect, then that's very aggressive. So that's where you need to be really close to almost $100 price point on that. And looking at multiple architectures, this is what we're doing as well. Yes, we are a premier partner of Intel, but we are not limited to it. So we're trying to see, when we hear the business models from the service providers, what other alternatives could be out there. But yet, there is a question about how much effort does it take to convert from one architecture to the other, especially when you look into a cloud environment, to make sure they are actually communicating properly and they're also doing the processing as an x86 architecture.
Great, excellent. So I think we're out of time for Sven. So excellent presentation, Sven, and thanks so much for the Q&A. So
Thank you.